All right, well, welcome to Surviving Homeownership. Today I'm going to be interviewing Adam Ross with Ross Restoration. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Andy.
So for those of us who don't know, what is a restoration company and how did you get into it?
I got into it by kind of dumb luck. I actually, first job right out of high school was a carpet cleaning technician for a company here in Fort Wayne. And 21 years later, here we are. I've had this business for about 15 years, and I love the industry, love what we do. And it started from basically just carpet cleaning.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about some of the common myths about mold as far as how you clean it. What about bleach? What about kills? What is your opinion on those methods and other common methods?
Well, I would say that bleach and kills are going to be the two most common thought processes for mold mitigation, and they're both very, very inappropriate and ineffective in the mold mitigation arena. Bleach is effective. It's a viricide, but it's not effective on porous surfaces. So most commonly when folks have mold in their home, it's normally on drywall, it's normally on plywood, and bleach is not an effective agent for removal of mold on those surfaces. It's great at cleaning the surface, but it's not going to penetrate into that porous material and kill the root structure. And then the same thing with kills. If you apply kills over any type of substrate where there is still a root structure of mold, as soon as high humidity happens or water occurs in that area, that mold is actually going to become active and grow right through that kills. And then often when you've got kills over any substrate, for us to go back in and do it the right way is often more costly because it takes a lot more labor, a lot more aggressive cleaning procedures to be able to penetrate down to that root structure to effectively get rid of it.
And so what are some pieces of equipment and tools that you have that the average homeowner wouldn't have as far as cleaning mold? Because a lot of people probably don't know that it's just not good to remove the mold, but it's how you remove it, making sure that it doesn't become airborne. Can you address that a little bit?
Absolutely. Making sure that it doesn't become airborne and cross-contaminate other environments during the process is probably the most important piece of mold mitigation. If you're working in an environment creating positive airflow and that airflow is not controlled, what it's going to do is effectively cause that to kick up into the air. It could be caught into your HVAC system, spread throughout the entire structure, and thus make everything a lot worse. Special equipment that we use special containment procedures. We do pressure differentials. We test the actual pressure in the chamber that we're working to ensure that the air that we're working in is being exhausted somewhere else, normally outside of the structure, so it's not going to be a problem. We do that through using air scrubbers or negative air machines. We also use truck-mounted HEPA vacuum systems that are specifically designed for industrial type application where they're very rigid, they're very strong, and they're very effective. Those are probably the most common tools that we use that the average homeowner is not going to have access to. They're very expensive, and you can get them in the local markets, but the problem is cross-contamination. If the equipment that you're renting isn't properly maintained, if the HEPA filters aren't changed out regularly, you could actually be renting contaminated equipment and actually bring in more mold into the structure, and obviously that's not a good thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't even thought about that for someone trying to clean it themselves. And obviously, we're talking about areas that are bigger than 9 or 10 square foot, correct?
Absolutely. Every time the IICRC and the EPA guidelines for mold remediation say that anybody can do mold mitigation 10 square feet or less, provided they're not immune compromised kids, elders, or pregnant women.
Okay, that is great to know. So I hear a lot of people say I have black mold, and then they start panicking. Can you talk about that? Is there any merit to the black mold syndrome?
Well, so the black mold syndrome is a little bit different than the black mold, if you will. So the black mold was actually created by the media outlets back 20, 30 years ago. There was a court case in California where a dormitory had mold growth. And so it made it to the media. The media took the term black mold and ran with it. And so that black mold term has turned into toxic mold, or most consumers kind of use that as a term that they see black mold, they think it's this toxic, deathly mold. And the reality is that there are hundreds of thousands of different types of mold. And to be quite honest with you, we don't know everything that there is to know about mold. And so when we look at mold from a professional instance, we look at it under a microscope, and it's very hard to decipher what those spores are and exactly what species they are. And so we generalize those different species down, And most commonly, when you hear the term black mold, it means absolutely nothing to us. Now, on an immune system basis, everybody's immune system is different. So I'm going to react different to different species that you're going to react differently to. And so when you say one term of black mold, you can't really say that it's all encompassing, because it may affect me and it might not affect you at all.
So what you're saying is black mold is not to be feared more necessarily than white mold or yellow mold.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
What are some tips that homeowners can do to prevent mold growth in their home?
Great question. So in order for mold growth to occur, you have to have a mold spore, a food source, and moisture. And so when you open and close doors to your house or your business, you're going to have air exchange. And every time that happens, mold spores are coming in and mold spores are going out with the airflow. So we really can't do anything about mold coming into a structure. So then we look at a food source, and a food source is going to be anything organic. That can be dust, it could be drywall, it could be wood. So we really can't do anything about that because all of our homes and businesses are constructed that way. So what we do look at is we look at moisture. And if we can control the moisture, we can control mold. If we have a humidity level higher than 55%, some say 60%, that's when we're going to start to see active mold growth. So we can control that moisture level by maintaining humidity in structures. We can use the HVAC systems as well. There are air filtration devices that we're using nowadays that can exchange air into structures. So basically, dehumidification is the number one thing. In our area, we have basements. Those basements are going to go through seasonal change. And when that change occurs, humidity is going to be a problem. And so I always tell my clients that every basement should always have a 70-pint dehumidifier plugged in, actively working, draining into some type of drain, and set to the lowest setting so that we can control that humidity in that environment so we don't have mold growth.
Can you speak specifically then to bathrooms and then attics?
Absolutely. So our bathrooms are also a crucial area in our structures. So bathrooms are always going to have high humidity. The same thing with utility rooms. When we've got a dryer, a washer dryer, we've got a shower. Some people have saunas. We want to make sure that the air in that area is controlled, and that should be vented or ducted to the outside of the structure. And of course, when you're taking a shower, a hot steamy shower, make sure that the bathroom vent fan is turned on and it's running. And when you get out of the shower, leave the door to the bathroom open, leave that vent fan turned on so it's exhausting that humidity outside of the structure, for 10 to 20 minutes after your shower is over with.
And so for attics and crawl spaces, what do you recommend for those? Because I see a lot of mold in both, and I'm sure you see a lot more than I do.
Absolutely. We've become so hypersensitive to efficiencies. And so what we think is we should seal up our house and make it as airtight as we possibly can. And for mold growth, that's not the truth. The truth is we want to have cross ventilation in those areas so that we have airflow coming in and we've got airflow going back out. What that's going to do is that airflow is going to pass over the substrate. It's not going to allow mold growth to occur. We also don't want to over insulate these areas where we could potentially cover up soffit vents. We could block that airflow and the mechanics of the structure of the attics or the crawl spaces from properly working the way they're supposed to and the way that they're designed to.
So what are some things that a lot of mold remediation companies do that is really wasting their money? As far as there's been a lot of times where I'll go and I'll do a sampling after an air sample after a company's come in and they've actually made the situation worse. So what are some of the common mistakes that you see and things buyers or people who have mold that are hiring a remediation company should be looking for in the bids and key questions to ask whoever's going to be doing the remediation job?
So I would say the number one thing that costs time and it costs money that mold contractors don't do right is they don't have a full understanding of the environment before they work or they start their work. So mold is impossible to see in some cases, and sometimes you can see very small areas isolated of mold growth, but you could have a very elevated indoor air amount of species present. So the first thing we want to do is we want to understand exactly what's going on in that environment. And that should never be done by the mold mitigation professional. It should be done by an independent environmental professional like yourself. More accurate information to start the project is going to tell us how the work should be done, what air controls or parameters should be taken to get rid of the mold. And then when we finish the work, it should always be certified that it's been done properly. If a mold mitigator is not doing it in that order, what's going to happen is They're not going to understand the environment. They're potentially going to go in there. They're going to start doing demolition or going to start cleaning, and they're not accurately going to know what the environment has going on. And what will happen is that airflow could make the problem potentially worse. There might be areas that are missed. And if those areas are missed, obviously that mold has a very likelihood of coming back. And so if we don't test, we don't know, and that's the truth. So we don't want to waste time or money or energy on this project until we accurately know what's going on in that environment.
And that's what I've told a lot of my clients as well, as far as why we should get a test after to make sure that it passes. And I know there are a lot of companies out there who clean mold and they don't want any kind of testing. And I always tell customers, it's like, well, would you really trust if you were a teacher, would you trust your students grading every single test of theirs? I mean, yeah. So that usually kind of helps make that point.
Absolutely. It's crucial to have the work certified that it's been done properly afterwards. It's impossible to know without taking proper tests.
So let's talk about mold inspections from your perspective. What are some things that home inspectors or other mold inspectors do that truly are just wasting customers' money? What are some common things you see that really doesn't give you enough data to work with?
It's a great question. So quite often we see home inspectors reports that have 1 or 2 tests done to a structure. And now everybody that's involved in the conversation of either buying or selling a property thinks that we've got a mold problem. The reality is that there is mold everywhere. So if you're not properly sampling and taking the proper amount, you really can't accurately pinpoint where the mold is, if it's a situation that requires professional mitigation. So what I'll see is 1 or 2 tests come across my desk that says it was swabbed or it was a tape lift or 1 air sample. And it's just not adequate information to be able to determine if a professional is needed. So what needs to happen is that if the home inspector is doing testing, they should be trained on how to take proper tests. They should know how to communicate how many tests are necessary to accurately understand an environment. And if they can't do that, or the consumer doesn't want to pay for it, then to be quite honest with you, it's not worthy of taking 1 or 2 samples, because it's just not going to tell us anything that we need to know. And so I think that people need to reach out, do their research, because it is expensive to take tests and to do the sampling that's properly, it's necessary for the job. But at the same time, if you're only going to do 1 or 2, it's not going to tell us anything, and we're going to have to start all over, and then we're going to waste time and money again.
So you're probably also looking for more than just a pass or fail mold test result.
Absolutely, because again, with mold being everywhere on the outside of the structure, it's going to come in the environment. And if we don't know exactly what's going on, even from room to room, it's very hard to make a determination whether the mold's a problem in that structure or not.
And I believe you answered this a second ago, but I'm going to rephrase it because I get this question quite commonly. Buyers want to know, or people who own a home, they want to know, if I know there's mold, why do I need to pay to get it inspected? Why can't I just hire a remediation company to come clean it?
Well, that kind of goes back to the 1 or 2 tests. So if I test 1 room and I do 1 sample in that room and it comes back at, let's just say 3,000, I might assume that there's a big problem in that room. But the reality is, if I didn't do a control, or what we call a baseline sample, which is outside of the structure, to know what species are normally present in that environment and what those levels are at, I might find that 3,000 in that bedroom is the exact same outside, which means I need to close the windows or close the doors. And there's really nothing for a professional to do. So I think that the information is out there. We've got to find the right resources and learn more about it beforehand. And let's not waste time sampling, because again, the biggest problem that I see with the home inspectors in a real estate transaction is when people hear mold, they think dollar signs, they think time and energy and effort. And a lot of people don't want to buy a structure that's had mold, when that's completely not the case. You can easily clean and treat up mold, and it will never be a problem in the future, but you just have to do it right the first time.
You have special encapsulants and sealants that you use on different types of material that can even guarantee no mold growth for X number of years, correct?
That's correct. Yep, we use a variety of products that have anywhere from a 1-year to a 10-year warranty. They're not inexpensive whatsoever. They contain silver nitrate to it, so it's a very expensive application, but they're very effective. And not only does Ross offer a warranty, the manufacturers of those products offer a warranty as well.
Okay, that's interesting. So we've hit a lot of the topics I wanted to talk about already. So what are some of what are some of the things that let me rephrase this. What are some of the things that you commonly hear that just get you fired up about mold? Some of those things that you just can't stand, you cringe every time you hear it.
I would say the number one thing that I run across is one of the things that we do here at Ross is because we're known through the community of having integrity. We serve our clients well and we educate our clients to make an informed decision. So oftentimes we find ourselves in situations where we're cleaning up other companies' messes where they went in with bleach and they went in with kills and they didn't do the job right. So that's how we've built our reputation. And quite honestly, it's the wild, wild west when it comes to mold mitigation. There's no licensure in the state of Indiana. There's no regulation. So anybody can pick up a shop vac, a can of kills, and a gallon of bleach and say that they're a mold mitigator. And they think that there is big potential to make a lot of money. And there is when you do it the wrong way. What we do is expensive. There is a lot of labor involved in doing it right. I always tell people it's kind of like cleaning something you can't see and you're cleaning it with a toothbrush. It's very hard to do. If you get the right training, you can do it and do it well, and you can pass those clearance tests every time. But the most frustrating thing is the average consumer is being ripped off by a lot of these people that don't know what they're doing. They're only doing it for the wrong reasons. And so effectively, we're all paying for it because it's driving up costs. And in the end, it's going to start affecting our property values if it's not done properly.
Can you talk to me a little bit about fire restoration? That's something I don't know much about, and I know you specialize in it, and I've heard it's very difficult to do right. Can you walk me through what that looks like and your process?
Absolutely. So when a fire occurs in a home, there are thousands of steps in the process from getting from point A to the completion. And one of the biggest issues we have with fire damage jobs is going to be lingering odors. It's kind of like cleaning the entire structure, every square inch of it, to remove the smoke damage and the soot that was left behind from a fire. Every type of fire has a different type of smoke that occurs in the structure. And so every single type of substrate, every surface has a different way that it has to be cleaned. And what can happen is if you don't clean it right before you start the reconstruction process, 6 months or a year from now, whenever a season changes or we have a heavy rainstorm and that humidity level goes up, what'll happen is a consumer will notice, in their back corner bedroom or some obscure area of the house, they're going to start noticing that smoke. And when that happens and the whole house is put back together, it can be very costly to start tearing things out to try and figure out where the contractor missed that smoke damage.
And I run into situations when I'm inspecting houses, I'll be up in an attic and discover that there was fire damage. And obviously, I report that at that point. But what are some other things maybe I should be on the lookout for concerning fires in particular? I've seen some, it looks like they just spray paint right over top of charred wood.
Yeah, so during the process in Allen County, thankfully, there is an inspection by a structural engineer that's required. So the structural engineer is going to go out, they're going to assess the damage to the structure, and then they're going to write a report as far as what members of the house, the framing members that can be saved and what has to be replaced. Sometimes it can be missed. And ultimately, if you look at the wood and if it's alligatored, you really don't want to just try and clean that and seal it. Now, some contractors they'll clean it up, they'll spray it over with an oil-based lacquer to try and seal that odor into that membrane. And it can be effective, but sometimes, again, you never know when that odor is going to reoccur. You never know when the airflow or the humidity in that attic space is going to change and it could get back into the house. So you do want to look for those signs and symptoms, especially if you notice any lingering odor. Smoke damage odor is not easy to clean up. And then we should definitely consult a professional.
Pinpoint it and help decide or figure out what happened and how to take care of it.
Okay, and we just lost your earbuds. I think the batteries might have gone out for you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I can hear you now too. Is that much worse?
Oh, I think I can touch it up. I just had a couple other questions for you and maybe there's some other things you'd like to add at the end. I would definitely love to hear any of your thoughts.
I think honestly, it's going really well. It's really, it's honestly whatever information you think the public wants to hear. I'm fine with however you want to go.
Okay. I'm going to quickly go back to mold. Is there anything that you'd like to tell, any advice you'd like to give realtors concerning mold remediation?
I think the most important thing for realtors to understand is that it's not always about money. And they need to team up with the right people that actually know what they're doing as pertaining to mold, because I've had cases over the years that have lingered on for 7 years in court. And these court battles often include realtors and the brokers or the managers of those realtors. So having a good partner in the industry that they can rely on for education, information, and insight is crucial to a realtor, because ultimately serving their clients and serving them well is what's going to get them more business. And there are the right partners out there, and there's definitely the wrong partners. So beware of who you're using and who you're trusting to do your mold mitigation, because I have seen it come back to bite people, years later.
And you've probably seen people selling a house not disclose they had mold and they knew it, and then that ends up in court. Have you been involved in any situations like that?
I have. I've been in a lot of situations like that. I've been in medical situations, senior living facility situations that are just like that. And when it's not disclosed, it's against Indiana state law. In fact, it's on the Indiana state sales disclosure form, and it must be disclosed. If it's not disclosed and it's known about, um, in our industry, there is documentation for the type of work that we do. There's documentation for insurance claims when you have water damage, when you have fires. And that paperwork with that documentation can really come back to harm you if you don't do what's right and according to the Indiana state law.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's why we have those laws to try to protect people.
Correct.
So you do a lot also with flood damage.
Correct.
When you have basements that flood or crawl spaces. What are some common problems you find, maybe even from an insurance perspective, that people never thought or never realized how much money it would cost to have the remediation happen and then the repair work afterwards? What would be your best advice for someone who has a basement?
Sure. My best advice for somebody with a basement is to know their insurance coverage. If you don't know what type of coverage you have, reach out to your insurance agent. Make sure that you know, because there are riders on insurance policies that do have exclusions, or they may even have caps in coverage. So if you have a sump pump in your basement, or if you have a sewer drain backup, oftentimes you'll find that there's a $5,000 or a $10,000 rider or cap in coverage. Make sure you understand that if you have finished space in your basement, and $5,000 coverage is not going to be enough for you. You should be looking at the value of what's in your basement, the space, if it's finished, if you have bar, or if you have a theater, if you have any type of additional personal effects that are down there that are very valuable. Make sure you know your coverage, because you might find yourself in a situation someday where you don't have coverage for it, or you have some coverage and it's just not enough.
Do you have any stories that you want to share that maybe illustrate some points? And if not, that's fine.
Well, I've got lots of stories. Most commonly, well, about 15 years ago, we saw one of the largest insurance carriers in the country start slapping a standardized $5,000 in coverage for a backed up storm drain or sump pump. And what happened is that the consumers didn't even realize it was going on at the time. So in a finished space with a basement bar, this happens very often. We'll have a $5,000 or a $10,000 mitigation cost just to remove the moisture from the structure so it doesn't cause bacteria or mold growth. And those bars that get wet that are high end, or theaters where you've got a lot of electronics, can get destroyed. And all of those personal effects, the electronics, the TVs, the sofas and chairs, if it's sewage water, it's going into a dumpster immediately. I've even had this happen in my own house where I only had $10,000 in coverage, and we had a small bar downstairs. I had a 60-inch TV on a stand, but my electrical box was sitting on the ground when the water came in, fried out my TV. And even as a mitigator, the $10,000 wasn't enough for me to restore my basement to the condition it was before. So I reached out to my insurance agent, and I upped the coverage. And I was surprised to find out that for, I think, $50,000 in coverage, it only costs us about $68 per year. So get with your insurance company or your agent. Make sure you've got the coverage. Make sure you know what your limits are. If you've got a finished space, I'd say at least have $15,000 to $20,000 in coverage down there if you plan to use and occupy that space.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you have anything else you'd like to share, that's fine. Otherwise, I've pretty much covered everything on my list, and you've answered everything very clearly, succinctly. So it was a good interview.
Good. I would just say that the last kind of final point is be very careful what you do when it comes to fire, water, or mold, specifically mold. Don't go out and Google mold, because what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of websites and resources that are really meant to scare you, and they're not meant to educate you. Mold is not a scary thing. Mold has been around for thousands of years. Obviously, it's going to be here forever. And so When you find yourself in a position for mold, be very careful who you trust and who you put in your inner circle for education. Reach out to somebody like Andy Overy because he knows his stuff very well. Here at Ross, we're happy to help you walk through this process, whether we do any work for you or not. We can be a great resource for you, but be very careful with mold, because the number one thing that we see with mold is when it's Googled, a lot of bad information is read, it's absorbed, and then oftentimes it causes a lot of scare and fear, and then we end up making irrational decisions that might cost us time and money down the road.
Yeah, thank you for hitting that, because I always do stress to people to only read stuff that the EPA puts out,
Yes,
just for that very reason.
absolutely.
So,
EPA.gov/mold is the best consumer resource that there is.
okay, well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop button on the record.